The words still echo in my head, rattling around like loose bullets in an empty chamber. "You're a cuckold, Thomas." A pathetic cuckold, Amanda had sneered, her lips curled in that cruel smirk, the same one that once made me fall in love with her. She didn't even flinch when she said it. Cold. Calculated. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, a suitcase in hand and a different man's scent all over her skin. Her lover, Mark, a coworker from her company, was waiting downstairs. I knew he was there, lurking like a predator who had already claimed his prey. The betrayal had been slow, poisoning our marriage drop by drop until there was nothing left but venom. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch the wall, break something, but all I could do was sit there, paralyzed. My mind was blank, my chest hollow, my hands shaking like a coward's. And that's exactly what she made me feel like, a coward. A man too weak to keep his wife from walking out the door with another man. "You'll never be enough," she had whispered as she turned her back on me, dragging her suitcase across the floor, the sound like nails on a chalkboard, the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the wreckage. Amanda wasn't always like this. I remember when we first met. She was 23, fresh out of college, and full of ambition. I was 27, already working my way up as an analyst at a financial firm. She was everything I had ever wanted, smart, funny, and breathtakingly beautiful. Her blonde hair caught the light like spun gold, and her green eyes sparkled with a fire I hadn't seen in anyone else. We married within a year. The love between us was undeniable, magnetic. I felt like the luckiest man alive. She was my best friend, my partner, and the woman I wanted to spend my life with. But it didn't take long before the cracks started to show. She had always been career-driven, but after 2 years of marriage, she grew restless. Amanda wanted more than just to be my wife, as she often put it. She was tired of being at home, and I could see the ambition boiling beneath her surface. That's when she got the job at Lambert Enterprises, a tech firm that promised growth, success, and, as I would later learn, something more sinister. She joined the company at 26, eager and driven. I supported her decision wholeheartedly. I wanted her to have everything she dreamed of, to be the confident, independent woman she craved to be. At first, it was exciting. She'd come home and talk about the projects she was working on, the teams she led, and how much she was learning. I could see the pride in her eyes, the fire returning. But soon, the company's culture began to take its toll. She was surrounded by younger, wealthy men who had risen through the ranks fast. Among them was Mark Evans, a senior executive in his mid-30s, who I would later discover was the catalyst for our downfall. I didn't notice the change right away. It started small. Amanda began staying late at work more often, claiming they were team-building exercises or important meetings. I didn't question it. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? We were married. We had built a life together. She wouldn't betray me like that. At least, that's what I told myself. Then came the parties, corporate events where spouses weren't invited. She started dressing differently, more provocatively, in ways that made me uncomfortable but that she said were empowering. She always had an excuse. "It's the industry, Thomas. This is how things are now," she'd say with a dismissive laugh. "You wouldn't understand." And maybe I didn't. But something felt wrong. It was around this time that I started hearing about Mark. He'd come up in casual conversations, but with a certain glimmer in her eyes that made me uneasy. "He's so smart," she'd say, or, "Mark really knows how to get things done." At first, I brushed it off as admiration for a colleague, but deep down, something inside me knew there was more to it. I began noticing small changes in her behavior. She'd come home smelling different, subtle, but noticeable. She spent more time on her phone, laughing at texts she wouldn't let me see. Our intimacy dwindled. The emotional connection we once shared felt distant, like she was slipping away piece by piece. One night, She came home late from a so-called work dinner, and for the first time, I confronted her. I asked her outright if there was something going on with Mark. She laughed. "Are you serious, Thomas? You're jealous of Mark? He's just a colleague. You're being paranoid." I tried to believe her, but the doubt had already taken root. Over the next few months, her late nights became more frequent. Weekends were spent at the office, or so she claimed. Our conversations turned cold, transactional. She stopped sharing things with me, and when I tried to reach out, she shut me down. There was always an excuse, always something more important than us. One evening, while scrolling through my social media feed, I stumbled upon a photo from one of her office parties. Amanda was in the background, laughing with Mark, her hand resting lightly on his arm. It was a small, intimate gesture, but it spoke volumes. I confronted her again, this time more forcefully, but she dismissed it. "You're being ridiculous," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is why I can't talk to you about anything anymore. You don't trust me." I felt like I was losing my mind. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just insecure. But the gut-wrenching feeling that something was wrong never left me. The breaking point came when she started going on business trips. At first, they were short, just a night or two. But then they became longer, stretching into week-long getaways. She'd come back with gifts and excuses, telling me all about the important deals she was closing, the meetings that couldn't wait. I should have seen it then. I should have known. But I didn't. I believed her, because I wanted to believe that the woman I had married would never betray me like that. It wasn't until the last trip, the one that would change everything, that I discovered the truth. She had been gone for nearly 2 weeks, and one night, unable to sleep, I decided to call her hotel room. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Something inside me snapped. I opened her laptop, the one she had left at home by accident, and logged in. My heart raced as I clicked through her emails, and there it was, a series of messages between her and Mark. Explicit, detailed, and confirming everything I had feared. I remember feeling sick, the bile rising in my throat as I read each word. My hands shook as I scrolled through months of emails, each one worse than the last. They'd been seeing each other for nearly a year. All those nights she'd claimed to be working, she was with him. And the worst part? She didn't even bother to hide it anymore. The next morning, she came home, and I was waiting for her. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but all I could do was stare at her as she casually walked in, suitcase in hand, not a care in the world. She saw the look on my face and sighed. "You found out, didn't you?" she said, almost bored, as if this was an inconvenience more than anything else. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Does it matter?" she replied, shrugging. "You couldn't stop it even if you tried." And that was when I realized it. She had already made her choice. I couldn't stop her, no matter how much I wanted to, no matter how much I begged in my mind for her to see the damage she was causing. She stood there, indifferent, like she had already emotionally left me long before her bags were packed. The truth is, I was too late. Too slow to act. Too naive to believe that I could fix something that had been broken for years. For days after Amanda left, I sank into a fog of disbelief. Every corner of our house screamed with memories of us, photos from vacations, her perfume still lingering in the bathroom, the faint indent of her side of the bed. I didn't know how to move, how to process the fact that she had discarded me like an old coat that no longer fit. "You couldn't stop it even if you tried." Those words echoed over and over, piercing through my mind like daggers. She had made me feel powerless, like I was just a casualty in her grand scheme. But as the days dragged on, something shifted inside me. Anger bubbled up, burning away the numbness. It wasn't just rage at her betrayal, it was rage at myself for allowing it. For standing by while she treated me like an afterthought. The image of Mark, smirking, thinking he had won, fueled the fire even more. He had stolen my wife, humiliated me, and Amanda had let him, basking in her newfound freedom while I was left to pick up the pieces. But I wasn't going to wallow forever. No, I had lost Amanda. But what I hadn't lost was the ability to make sure they both paid for what they had done. I remember sitting on the couch, staring at the divorce papers Amanda had sent over. She had the audacity to demand the house and alimony, even though she was the one who had torn everything apart. It was like a slap in the face, one final insult to remind me that she had all the control. Or so she thought. I wasn't going to sign those papers, not without a fight. And if she thought I was going to let her and Mark ride off into the sunset without consequences, she had another thing coming. That night, as I sat in the darkness, my mind started working. I had spent my entire career in finance, understanding systems, manipulating numbers, finding loopholes where others couldn't. Now, it was time to apply that same skill set to my life. Revenge wasn't going to be violent. It wasn't going to be dramatic. It was going to be surgical, precise, and deeply satisfying. I was going to take everything they had built together and watch it crumble from the inside out. I knew where to start: Mark's company. Amanda had joined Lambert Enterprises at 26, but Mark had been a key player for years. His position of power had given him the leverage to woo Amanda, to sway her with promises of more success, more money, more status. But power can be fragile, especially when there's someone like me who knows exactly how to exploit its weaknesses. The first thing I did was reach out to some old contacts, people I had worked with in finance who had access to information Mark probably thought was safe. I knew Lambert Enterprises had been teetering on the edge for a while: bad investments, shady business practices. Mark had managed to keep things under wraps, but I had the skills to dig deeper. Within a week, I had uncovered enough dirt to make his life very, very difficult. Financial discrepancies, misuse of funds, investments in companies that barely existed. It was all there, hidden in the paperwork he thought no one would look at closely. But I didn't want to just ruin his career. That would be too easy. I wanted to ruin his reputation, to make sure that no matter where he went, the stench of scandal followed him. I started leaking bits of information, strategically planting rumors among key people in the industry. It didn't take long for word to spread. Once the right people got wind of it, Mark's name became synonymous with corruption and fraud. Investors pulled out, deals were cancelled, and soon, the company began to fall apart. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. I knew Amanda had tied herself to Mark's success. She had left me for the promise of something bigger, something better. But what would she do when that world started collapsing around her? I watched from a distance as the cracks began to form. Their perfect little life, the one they had built on deceit and lies, was starting to crumble, and I wasn't done yet. I still had one more card to play. It wasn't hard to find out where they were living. Amanda had moved in with Mark not long after leaving me, and they had bought a beautiful new home, far more extravagant than anything we ever had. I knew how much Amanda valued appearances. She thrived on being seen, on being admired. So when I anonymously tipped off a financial investigator to look into their assets, I made sure that house was on the list. It took a few months, but eventually, everything unraveled. Mark was under investigation for embezzlement, their assets were frozen, and the lavish life Amanda had traded me for was slipping through her fingers. The day I got the news that their house had been seized was the first time I truly felt at peace. But I wasn't done. Amanda had called me a cuckold, mocked me, and left me for her lover. But now, she was the one living in the ruins of her choices. And soon, she would come crawling back. I just had to wait. I sat at my desk, staring out of the window, watching the storm clouds gather in the distance. They were a perfect metaphor for what I had been quietly building behind the scenes. Amanda and Mark probably had no idea just how deep I had planted the seeds of their destruction. They still thought they had the upper hand, still thought they could play me for the fool, like I was some powerless cuckold who couldn't fight back. They couldn't have been more wrong. The first phase of my revenge had gone smoothly. Mark's company was in shambles. Lambert Enterprises had been exposed for the fraud it was, and Mark's reputation was being obliterated in the industry. Investors had pulled out, lawsuits were piling up, and his once admired career was disintegrating like sand slipping through his fingers. I had orchestrated every piece of it. Every anonymous tip, every whisper to the right person, every leak of damning financial records, it had all been part of my plan. But now, it was time for the second phase. This was personal. This wasn't just about destroying their professional lives. This was about making sure Amanda and Mark felt the sting of betrayal as deeply as I had. I leaned back in my chair, running through the plan in my head. I had been meticulous, making sure not to leave a single trace of my involvement. Amanda always underestimated me, thought I was just a numbers guy, someone who couldn't handle the dirty work, but she had forgotten just how good I was at playing the long game. It started with the small things, the subtle manipulations. I knew Amanda had a fondness for luxury, her weakness was always money and status. So I made sure her credit score was the first thing to go. I had contacts in all the right places, people who owed me favors. It didn't take much to make it look like Amanda had defaulted on a few loans, missed a couple of payments. Within weeks, her once perfect credit rating plummeted. Suddenly, she was getting rejection letters for loans she never thought she'd need to apply for. No more credit cards. No more designer clothes. No more lavish vacations. Her world of comfort and excess was starting to shrink. And I knew she felt it. The first time I saw her after the split was about 2 months into my plan. She was standing in line at a local coffee shop, dressed in something far less expensive than what she used to wear. Her hair was a little more unkempt, her makeup less polished. I could see the frustration in her face, the strain of trying to keep up appearances while everything around her was collapsing. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. Just seeing her there, struggling to keep it together, was enough. Mark, on the other hand, was harder to break. He was cocky, arrogant, someone who believed he was untouchable. But even the most arrogant people have weaknesses, and his was his ego. I knew he couldn't handle public humiliation, couldn't stand the thought of being seen as anything less than the best. So I made sure to feed the rumors, quietly, of course, that his success had been nothing more than luck. That Lambert Enterprises had been built on a house of cards, ready to topple at any moment. His colleagues began to distance themselves. Business meetings were cancelled. Deals were mysteriously delayed. And the whispers grew louder, eroding the confidence people once had in him. It wasn't long before Mark was forced to step down as CEO, claiming it was for the good of the company. But everyone knew the truth, his empire was crumbling, and there was no saving it. But the real victory came when I discovered something about Mark that even Amanda didn't know. He had been siphoning money from the company for years, hiding it in offshore accounts. If the authorities found out, he wouldn't just lose his job, he'd be facing jail time. And that's when the real fun began. I waited until the perfect moment, when they were at their lowest, to drop the final bomb. It was a chilly Thursday morning when I got the call. Mark had been arrested for embezzlement. His assets had been frozen, and Amanda's luxurious lifestyle had officially come to an end. The irony was delicious. The very man she had left me for, the man she had mocked me with, was now facing prison time, and she was left with nothing. No money, no status, no future. I poured myself a drink, savoring the moment. But I wasn't done yet. The last part of my revenge was the most personal. Amanda still hadn't felt the full weight of her betrayal, not yet. She needed to know what it felt like to be discarded, to be humiliated, to be powerless. So I sent her a letter. It was simple, nothing too flashy. Just a few lines, really, Amanda, I know about everything. I know you left me for Mark, thinking he was better. But now, you see the truth. You see what your choices have led to. I told you I would never be a cuckold. I told you I would never be weak. Now, you're the one standing in ruins. Enjoy your new life. I'm sure it's everything you ever dreamed of. I signed it with my name, just to remind her who had won. The look on her face when she read it, I could only imagine. She had always thought she could control me, manipulate me, use me. But now, she was the one left with nothing. No husband. No lover. No future. And as for me, I was just getting started. The knock on my door came late in the evening, just as the first cold winds of winter had begun to settle in. I didn't have to guess who it was. I had been waiting for this moment, knowing it was only a matter of time before Amanda came crawling back, desperate and broken. When I opened the door, there she was, Amanda, the woman who had once been the center of my world, now standing before me looking like a shell of her former self. Her eyes were sunken, her once perfect makeup streaked by the remnants of tears. She clutched her jacket tightly around her, shivering not just from the cold, but from the reality she now faced. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, as if trying to find the words that might save her. But I wasn't going to save her. Not anymore. Jason, please, she finally whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. I have nowhere else to go. I stood there, silent, taking in the full sight of her downfall. This was the woman who had thrown away everything we had, who had called me weak, mocked me, and walked away without a second thought. Now she was standing on my doorstep, pleading for help. Mark was gone. He had been sentenced to prison for embezzlement just a few days ago. His assets were seized, his name dragged through the mud. Amanda had been evicted from the house they had once shared, forced to sell off what little she had left just to scrape by. The lavish life she had traded me for had crumbled in her hands, just like everything else she had touched. You've got some nerve, I finally said, my voice cold. Coming here, after everything. I made a mistake, she choked out, tears spilling down her cheeks. I should have never left. I didn't know what I was doing, Jason. Please, I just need a place to stay. Just for a little while. I could see the full weight of her regret in her eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me with love, before they had been clouded by greed and ambition. But I felt nothing for her now, no pity, no sorrow, nothing but the cold satisfaction of knowing I had won. I had played the long game, and I had won. You didn't make a mistake, Amanda, I said calmly. You made a choice. And now, you're living with the consequences. Her lip quivered, and she stepped closer, as if proximity would change the outcome of this conversation. I didn't mean those things I said, she whispered, about you being weak. I was angry, confused. I thought Mark was the answer, but he wasn't. I see that now. You're strong, Jason. You've always been strong. I couldn't help but laugh. The irony of it all was too perfect. Now, after everything, she was seeing me for who I truly was, not the man she had mocked but the man who had orchestrated her downfall without her even knowing it. But it was too late. Far too late. I don't need your validation, Amanda, I said, stepping back into the warmth of my house, leaving her standing out in the cold. And I don't owe you anything. Her face crumbled at my words, and for a moment, I almost saw the woman I had once loved. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who had made her bed with Mark and was now lying in the ruins of it. You ruined everything, she whispered, her voice shaking. You did this to me, didn't you? You destroyed Mark's career, our life together, everything. I smiled. The truth was finally out, and it felt even better than I had imagined. I didn't ruin anything, Amanda, I said. You did that all on your own. I just made sure you felt the consequences of your actions. She stared at me, disbelief mixing with a fresh wave of rage, but she knew there was nothing she could do. I had played the game better than either of them ever could, and now, she had to live with the results. Please, Jason, she whispered one last time, her voice barely audible. I'm begging you. But I had no sympathy left for her. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away. Now, I was moving on, free from the chains of her betrayal, while she was trapped in the wreckage she had created. "I'm done, Amanda," I said, my voice final. "I've moved on. You should, too." And with that, I shut the door, leaving her on the other side, alone and defeated. As I walked back into the warmth of my home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Amanda had called me a cuckold, humiliated me, left me for her lover. But in the end, I had emerged stronger, and they had fallen apart. The revenge had been slow, calculated, and deeply satisfying. Now, as I stood in the peace and quiet of my house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Freedom from the weight of Amanda's betrayal, from the pain she had caused me. I had taken control of my life, and in doing so, I had destroyed the people who thought they could destroy me. Amanda would never recover from this. She would never get back the life she had lost. And me? I was just getting started. With a deep breath, I grabbed my phone, dialing a familiar number. "Hey, Sarah," I said with a smile. "You still up for dinner tomorrow night?" Life was good again. It was finally mine.